Welcome, everybody, to the Leadership Coaching Lounge. It's another one in our series. I'm very, very pleased to introduce today Dragan. Dragan has been working in the same field for more years than I think I possibly have as well. So, Dragan, would you like to give an introduction, please?
Yes, I would love, but is it leadership lounge or leadership lunch?
Lounge.
Because lounge,
Yours is the lunch break leader, I think.
because I was thinking lunchtime, I'm getting hungry.
It is getting around to lunchtime, you're right.
Yes, mine is the lunch. Yes, yes, yes. Um, Thank you for having me, first of all.
Delighted you're here.
And secondly, I mean, who I am, it's a very big question. I'm still trying to figure out, personally and professionally,
Hmm.
being nearly 50, but still, I'm in a search of who I am. But in few words, I'm someone who works with people. I call myself progress partner. So I help people to move from one place to another, or teams to move from one place to another. I use a lot of coaching, facilitation, and similar skills.
Mm.
And I have a very enjoyable background in mental health, which I
Mm.
really love. And I still do work in mental health,
Mm.
and especially like team health. And I also host my podcast, the Lunch Break Coach podcast,
Mm.
which is growing. I'm happy. And I'm a father,
Uh-huh.
husband, and I'm also a jiu-jitsu fan,
I didn't know
right?
that. That's
Like,
interesting. I didn't know that.
yes, as someone said recently, never trust an old man practicing young men sports.
You can't call yourself an old man. You're not over 50. I'm over 50, so you're not allowed to call yourself an old man until at least you've gone past 50.
Most of the people I practice could be my children, so but actually it's very nice. Yes, it keeps me sane.
Oh,
Yes.
good. Well, that's super important. So we were talking earlier about what we were going to chat about today, and I think we were
Mm-hmm.
on the subject of human-centered leadership. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and I wonder what that means for you from your experience of working with various people, and also how that fits in with your values.
Mm. Uh, it really resonates a lot with my values, because I realize it's not where I started actually my work, but I always worked around people, and I wanted people to do something for themselves. I
Mm.
started working with children many years ago, and then I moved to adults. In training, I was in HR, which is like the human element.
Mm.
And at the time, I was seeing everything a lot about productivity,
Hmm.
profit targets, with the cost of burning people.
Yeah.
And then I realized there's something wrong here,
Hmm.
because we were expecting machines to replace people, but we're still here.
Yeah.
Okay, there's AI and it's taking a lot of tasks, but I still don't think it's going to replace the human.
Hmm.
And for me, the human-centered leadership is really being focusing on the quality of lives and experiences the people working for you
Hmm.
within a company, making sure that you're keeping the human element and keeping them engaged so they can deliver what you want and they can help your business to grow.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that. And it's interesting listening to your history. We've got similar backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in everything from startups right through to Citigroup in mergers and acquisitions before I retrained to be a psychotherapist. And then I worked in social care like you. And what was interesting for me was if I reflect on the experience of working in commerce, good 30 years ago now, to then going into working into social care and leading big teams there, the difference in the appreciation of the individual and their humanity, and therefore taking a person-centered leadership approach to nurturing that and nurturing those talents to really feel valued, appreciated, and therefore those people wanting to give their best compared to back in the day in business was night and day. And if I think about my experience now, my sense is that I agree with you that this whole notion about people are there to make profit, it's a very hard and analytical calculation. I find now, I'm pleased to say that when I'm working with teams and people like you, Dragan, that there is a leaning towards understanding that yes, we can achieve profit plus if we really look out for our people, we really look after our people and give them a psychologically safe space to work in and lead from a human perspective. Would you agree?
I completely agree with this, because even if you think the current reality, there are not many people available.
Mm-hmm.
So if people leave us, leave our business, what's going to happen? Where we're going to find good quality people? Not they're not. I mean, there's practically no one available sometimes for certain jobs. They keep recruiting, and it's not about lowering your standards. It's about people don't want to work for certain businesses, or there are no people available.
Mm.
And the only way we can keep people is for as long as we can, because I don't believe someone, should stay in one company forever. That's my belief. We have to make sure that they're healthy, they're feeling safe, they're learning, they're growing with the company, and they can continue giving their best.
Yeah. I agree with you. And it's interesting, you're taking that message further on, as you say, about somebody not staying with the same company forever. If we or leaders can give them the experience of feeling valued and nurtured and giving them that human-centered leadership experience, even when it comes to the time for them to leave, which naturally happens often, to move into something different. If they leave with an exceptional experience of what that lead has done within the organization, if you take that further in terms of employee branding, that's gold, because that speaks volumes to the rest of the market about lack of talent, as you just described, wanting to come in and work in that business, because the opportunity for somebody new to come in and have that same experience of the leadership in that organization is the difference between attracting the very best people that want to come and give their best and work and having this high churn, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I remember what my leadership mindset was, because I used to work with very newly graduate people who just starting in their career, rarely someone who was experienced. My drive was, I want to make sure that these people have very good leadership experience. So when they become leaders, they can pass this. We can create a ripple effect. And I could see, and that's not, to flatter myself. It's more about, it was an observation that people who moved out from my team and joined other teams had really different approach from other parts of the organization.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting, actually. Do you think that gave them the benefit and their new teams the benefit? Or do you think it also gave them a potential conundrum and a struggle? Because I think that the human-centered approach is certainly coming more into the fore. But similarly, if you have a larger organization, you have one leader that's taking that approach and then others that are very focused on numbers and targets and delivery. There can be disparity there, can't there?
And sometimes people who really focus on human-centered approach feel lonely. These leaders, they feel lonely. And then they search for organizations who really value this and welcome this approach. So that's what happens. But yes, people feel lonely. And then we're talking about sometimes organizational culture, which to me is a bit of a, how to say, it's a very flexible term. Let's put it this way. Because I was talking to someone and told me we have two floors. One floor has one culture. The floor on top has another culture. So how are we talking about organizational culture in this context? But having some standards of what's the minimum requirement for the culture, I think it's important. So organization who really put as this is their value, the human-centered approach should really try to, I'm not going to use the word enforce in the meaning we said, but they really should require from leaders to have this and measure their performance based on this, not only on numbers and achievements and so on and so on.
Yeah, I completely echo that. And I've worked with a business over the last year, 18 months, I suppose. And having had the leadership team together a number of times, and the leadership team has changed somewhat, which speaks to itself. The number of times in each of those sessions talking about how do we achieve what the business needs, so the operational excellence, And then bringing in this point about part of that excellence has to be about people. It has to be a focus on people and how we're leading those people. And from one session to the next, about this part here, about the people just sliding off the roadmap because it wasn't something that was bringing in the bucks. And that's the challenge. And that's the real focus that businesses need to find. And taking your point further about values, there's something about a business understanding its purpose. We can understand what our vision and mission are because they're strategic, and we can understand values because they come out of that. But if we understand our purpose as a business, and for example, Netflix, their purpose is to entertain the world. Now, that's a wonderfully altruistic, is a great purpose to have as an organization. Once that starts to permeate through, then to entertain the world, if you think about that from a leadership's perspective, it's such a positive message. To embody that, embody the values of the organization, there is an innate attraction to want to lead in a similar vein. And to your point about measuring, there's, you'll have come across this, as will many of the listeners. OKRs, objective key results, or objective key outcomes, however you want to describe them, they're easy to measure in terms of the hard stats, and they're actually relatively easy to measure in terms of the softer outcomes. So if you have a leader and one of their OKRs is around people, then how do we measure that? And there's various ways you can do it. You can look at the development of the individuals in the team. You can do an internal satisfaction, if you will, about how team members feel about how they're being looked at. So getting the baseline on day one and then reviewing it as time goes on. You can look at how a number two has been identified within the team and how that person's being mentored and coached. You can look at how different opportunities within the organization have presented themselves, and therefore the natural thing for the other recruiting manager is to come and say, what's going on over in this team, and then have those conversations between leaders. There's a whole bunch of different metrics you can choose to employ that talk about human-centered leadership.
And how many companies actually use them?
Well, that's a fair question. My experience, Dragan, is that if the leader has the natural inclination to wanting to work with strengths and wanting to work with the talents that people present with, and therefore providing with the opportunity, then they are much more inclined to introduce those kind of measures into OKRs. If we're talking about businesses that are high-paced and they are, let's say, in a startup or moving from startup into enterprise, it's less possible necessarily to get those people to focus on those attributes because they've been in such a high-paced environment for such a long time. And that talks to your piece to do with culture. And that's such a flexible definition of what goes on within the business.
I mean, I see your point about startups. Yes, when you are focusing on surviving, you'd kind of park everything else on the side. But on at the other hand, if you don't pay attention on the people, that's also put the startup at a higher risk.
Let me ask you a question. You've been doing this for a long time now. What would you say, in your experience, are the keys to leaders developing that natural desire to want to lean more into the humanity of themselves primarily, and therefore their teams? What have you identified as being the tipping points that might have enabled that?
I guess everything starts with how curious the leader is. And how curious the leader is to explore any other ways of working than the one that he or she's been taught, or they perceive as more functional, more, more suitable for them. And that's where coaching comes into place, giving you other opportunities. I think listening to other people comes as a key element here. It's not only listen what people say about work, but what they say about themselves, about other people in the team, how they see things in the team, working or not working, even things in the organization. And I'm talking about gossiping. I'm talking about kind and meaningful constructive feedback. So curiosity, listening. I think also intention. That they set some intention to, change certain things, and the love of seeing people growing.
Yes, I think that's a key word, the love of seeing people growing. I think that's really important. And interestingly, picking up on your point about listening, And I know this is said to death, but I find it to be so true with a number of the people in the teams that I work with. The idea of listening to understand as opposed to listening to respond is
Mhm.
a very, very different way of opening up your ears and also opening up yourself as a human being to another to really want to understand what's going on for them, because it's such a rich communication that somebody's choosing to offer to the leader. And if the leader gives the space for that to go on, for that other human being to want to share, and then the leader wants to listen to understand, the richness that that can provide in terms of understanding what's going on with team dynamics, what's going on with the individual, what is there that I need to think about that I can bring in as change, as you rightly said, to make things better for everybody so that they feel there's a level of kindness that's coming through that enables them to want to give of themselves to be able to achieve, and therefore the business achieves.
Mm. And that sounds beautiful. And I really believe into this, Kelly. I've seen it working many
Yeah.
times when actually people shut up and start listening without the need to say anything. Because that's a big challenge for some leaders to stop saying, because
Mm-hmm.
where's their value if they don't say anything?
Mm-hmm.
And they try and they develop this. And then you have, on the other hand, the organization that doesn't allow them to do this
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't support them in doing this. And they start growing this internal conflict
Mm-hmm.
that what I'm doing is correct, but what I am valued for, it's not for what I'm doing, So kind of there's this internal battle happening that they might be doing something wrong, or do they believe that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing something right?
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable insight. I'm just reflecting on a coaching session I had very recently. And this particular person's senior within the organization. And what I've observed is with their team is that this individual is seen as the parent within the team. So what can happen is that you get some of the kids, for want of a better way of describing it, direct reports, end up treating the parent as dad in the situation. So they'll end up going and having these conversations with dad rather than choosing to want to step back and have the conversations with each other. So with the best intention of that particular leader in mind, they're actually disabling the opportunity for the team to feel safe enough to have those conflicts, those collaborations, etc. Because just keep going to dad, dad'll sort it out for us.
Mm.
And I think quietening that voice internally for some leaders is quite challenging because they're moving at such a pace still, and there's still this expectation of delivery on numbers. And I agree with you. I think that's an organizational piece that needs to go on. And the bigger the organization gets, it's possible, but it's very, very challenging to change that. Whereas if it's going from a startup or a smallish business and growing, the opportunity and the benefit of doing that can be seen tenfold over time.
I witnessed startup teams who had really good bond and communication and understanding, and what people would say like family feeling,
Yeah.
which another question that we can discuss in a in a different podcast for another hour. So let's better not start there. And then they start growing, and actually
Mhm.
people feel this loss
Yeah.
of humanity,
Yeah.
loss of this human interaction they used to have, this human, you said, the purpose
Mm.
of creating something. And then they have to become more operational, like we start talking about leadership. And I've seen leaders really suffering in a
Mm.
very painful way, because that human interaction and human element and human drive is no longer there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. And it's an interesting challenge. Same as you, the number of companies I've worked with that say we love what we've got here, we love the culture, and we want to preserve it going forwards. There has to be such a laser focus from somebody, whether it's the chief people officer or somebody in their team, that has absolute responsibility and freedom, frankly, to be able to make sure they can nurture that through the process. And it also takes money, it takes some investment because it just doesn't happen overnight. It's something that needs to be a continual level of investment. And again, it's about whomever is responsible for that in HR putting a cogent argument together to say it's going to cost us some money to do this, but the benefit of continuing to do this is talent attraction, retention, growth and development, and frankly, and most importantly, I think around leading with kindness and a human-centered approach to leadership is making sure we're giving people a psychologically safe space to be able to come in and work and bring of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the keys to success.
Mm. And there's a lot of discussion about psychological safety, and everyone speaks about a team that needs to be psychologically safe. And then I often see a contradicting actions.
Mm-hmm.
We punish, we challenge for things that we shouldn't be challenging. We judge for things that we shouldn't be judging. So throwing terms like that without sometimes understanding from leaders also doesn't work really well.
Yeah.
When I started working the first time in psychological safety, the first thing I realized is people really need to understand what on earth this is and how simple it is. Keep people psychologically safe. So you don't need to do a lot of work. You just have to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how our teams function. These are the levels of conflict we can allow between ourselves. I mean, a healthy and productive conflict. This is the level of judgment. And if we don't do this, this is what's going to happen. So someone needs to actually kind of observe that these rules are followed.
And that's really interesting you say that. What was going through my mind when you were sharing that is that the reality and the truth is that the opportunity for businesses to choose to put into practice those measures that you talk about, to provide a psychologically safe space for people, the opportunity cost is huge, but the risk of not doing that is enormous because you end up with burnout, you end up with fatigue, you end up with people gossiping, all of those things that make a business feel rotten in some way by choosing not to put in simple changes, as you rightly describe.
And then we're going back to, employees engagement, employees, I don't know, what other people talk about us outside. What other companies knows about us, what other competitors know about us, especially like if you function in a small market. These things are very, 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 very easy to get as and then you have things like Glassdoor where people post things and you can actually judge and act against some companies, and this will give you an advantage if you're smart enough to do your investigation and learn what your competitors are not doing. You can start offering it.
No, I think you're right. We're coming towards the end of this edition, and again, I hope you're going to come back for another one because there's so many more things I'd love to talk to you about. I'm going to put you on the spot, if I may. If you think about the conversation we've had and in your experience, what are the 3 key takeaways you think you could let people listening to this have to do with moving towards a person-centered leadership approach?
Okay. The first thing I would put is learn to listen. Learn to listen what people are saying, learn to listen what people want, learn to listen what people need. The second important thing that I think a leader should start if they would like to be more human-centered is establish boundaries. Work with some boundaries. And the third is start coaching. Start coaching for you. Start using your coaching leadership style, coaching leadership mindset to lead your people.
I think they're really valuable takeaways, actually. And I hope that people listening will take that as food for thought because they're big subjects in and of themselves, actually. But we're on the same page, Dragan. We are. I think that there's so much opportunity to leverage better for the people in the business by looking at them as human beings and really leading from the front, caring and delivering kindness through leadership, because it will always, without question, brings back results far, far stronger than looking at people as widgets and fulfilling a function. So yes, good.
I think a business should understand that what we're talking about is usually cost-free. Being kind doesn't cost much. It costs nothing.
I completely agree with you. It's a mindset, it's an attitude, and it's approach, and that's what it's all about. And it's completely free, and it's just a choice to dip into that toolbox and put it to the top shelf in your toolbox, so it's always available. So it's just becomes second nature all the time. Well, Dragan, I'm really delighted that you joined me today on this podcast. I hope you'll come back on it again, and I hope I'll come back on yours at some point in the future as well.
Yeah, there's plenty of space available in podcasts. That's what I like about podcasts.
It's very true. Listen, thank you very much indeed for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm sure that next year we'll be join forces on something together.
I hope so. Thanks, Dragan.